Okay, so there's more and more people coming in. Let me introduce myself. My name is Cheryl Spruce, and I'm the Head of Membership and Community Engagement here at Neighbourhood Watch Network. I have a colleague on the call today as well. Her name is Amy Morby, and she's the Head of Fundraising, and she'll be supporting us throughout the webinar. I'd also introduce you shortly to our speakers today. And also, I'd just like to go through some housekeeping with you. Okay, so we would prefer that your microphones are on mute to enable everybody to hear. We also ask you to turn your cameras off to enable maximum bandwidth so that there isn't any disruption to your signal with regards to the webinar. We will ask you to also put questions in the chat rather than put your hands up. It'll only be questions in the chat. So there will be a presentation today and then a chance for questions and answers. We ask you to be kind and courteous towards others at all times and also in the chat. And also our speakers are unable to comment on individual cases. So we can signpost you to different things, but we can't actually comment on individual cases, and signposting, etc., will be advised via the speaker, but be most likely to contact your local area services. So without further ado, I will stop sharing and I will introduce you to today's speakers. So today's speakers are Stacey and Davina from the Her Centre, and welcome and thank you very much for agreeing to be our speakers today. I'm just going to unmute you. So let me unmute you. Stacey, I've done you, and I'm just going to do Davina. There we go. So hopefully you shall now be able to hear and everything. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cheryl. Hi, I'm Stacey Smith. I'm the CEO for Her Centre. We're a local organization in Greenwich, but our organization is probably mirrored across many organizations, and we're going to tell you a bit more about it. And I'm here with my colleague, Davina Sokotra, who's the senior IDVA, independent domestic violence advocate and sexual violence advocate, with a specialist lead in health. So she runs our training for GPs and takes the referrals from GPs in health generally. So welcome. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background about our organization. We are a local organization. So if you don't work with women in Greenwich, it's not going to be us that you would contact. Uh-oh, why aren't you working? Come on, go forward. But it would mirror what you'd see anywhere. Okay, and my slides are not working for some reason. Wait,
you want me to share my screen?
Yeah, go ahead. So off to a great start with technology.
Can you see that okay?
Yeah, I can. That's brilliant. So just quickly, the Her Centre services, you know, our whole purpose is to empower women to move away from abuse and forward with their lives. So most of our work is around domestic and sexual violence and abuse. We are a women's organization. We just work with women. We recognize men are also victims, and I will talk a bit about that later. But we refer to victim support for male victims. What we offer in Greenwich is domestic that's okay. Domestic and sexual abuse advocacy for women and girls from 13 years up, counseling and help with work. open forums on women's issues. And we've run things such as women a bit. This isn't the right thing. This is an older presentation.
Oh, sorry. Give me a
That's
second.
no worries. What's the one I sent you just now?
I've got it here.
Right. Sorry, guys.
Okay, let's try this again.
Thank you, Davina.
It's okay. Okay,
That's
this
still
is the right one.
Oh,
This is the one you just sent me
is it?
recently. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, we'll go with it.
Okay.
Thank you. So if we move on to, we also run free women-only basic English classes, which we run with volunteer teachers, and we find this is a great way to engage women and let them find out about our other services around domestic and sexual abuse support. So next slide, please. So what the Independent Domestic and Sexual Violence Advocacy Service provides is risk assessments of the kind of risk women are experiencing. So, we go through a set risk matrix, asking 24 different questions to identify all the different potential risks that women themselves might not have recognized, but when you bring them together can really show the level of risk. We represent the client's voice at the MERIC meetings, which is the multi-agency risk assessment conferences. So it's where all the high risk cases, ones that score 14 or more on the risk assessment, are taken and are seen fortnightly with a panel of police, social services, health, ourselves, other relevant support agencies. Our IDSVA service also provides practical help around benefits, sorting out money issues, and certainly access to temporary housing, and where we can help with more, moving on with more long-term housing. Housing is the biggest challenge that we face in terms of supporting women. We can do quite a lot for them in terms of legal support. We can do a lot in terms of helping them sort out finances, a fair amount around immigration, but housing, there is no housing, no social housing. So it's a huge barrier that we face and that, the women we're working with face. We provide emotional support to women and, help them be more aware of, kind of what are the signs of abuse. And we are going to talk about coercive control and the other things related to that. And Davina herself will be talking you through the parent control wheel, which really looks at these issues about coercive control. We give advice on family legal issues. So we always help women to get a civil protection order if they are not going forward or there isn't enough evidence to go forward with a criminal prosecution. And we will support women through the court system, whether they're going for a criminal or a civil action. And as I said, we do give what assistance with housing that we can. Next slide. We run a drop-in too. We call it our one-stop shop. So we run it every Friday at a location in Woolwich Dockyard and at both on a Wednesday, both at Thamesmead and in Eltham. These are, kind of spread around the borough, and it allows women who, aren't being picked up through the police and social services, which are two main referral sources, or through any other sources, to just drop in and get free advice. So they will see one of our independent domestic and sexual violence advocates, and there's also a family solicitor there to give them help around family law, and as well as protection orders and looking at other kind of legal protection, help with criminal court. What comes up quite a lot is around issues of child contact. And these are usually where a woman has left an abusive partner, but he's threatening, he's going to court and he's, sort of pushing for child contact, which in some cases the children want, and there needs to be a way for them to have that access. But in some cases, they clearly are far too afraid to go forward with that. And that's still quite an issue. We find the courts are not as receptive as they could be to prioritizing the safety of women and children. We get help for women with benefits and more intensive housing support from advice hubs that are next door to where we do our one-stop shop drop-ins. So that means women can come in and get our help, but also can get help around these other practical issues from Citizens Advice Bureau, the Greenwich Housing Rights, welfare rights team, and also a specialist immigration lawyer. So that really does help women get a holistic service. And we will refer to other specialist services where it's needed. So that's just giving you a kind of picture of the range of our services. But I think you'll find in every local or county council that they'll have some kind of domestic violence advocacy service like ours. And it will try and meet also the needs around sexual abuse. And it will look at whether, there's some way that people can get instant access through some kind of drop-in service or helpline. So I think if you contact them for your local services, you'll be able to get a better picture of what's available to you locally. Thanks, Davina. Next slide. That's it. And I'm just going to give you an idea of quantity. So, we're in a London borough, Greenwich, about 280,000 people in the borough. We had over 1,000 referrals last year. We're a fairly small team. We've got 10 people who actually do the frontline domestic and sexual violence service. And out of those 1,116, we engaged 856. We get a lot of referrals of women with quite, complex challenges in their lives. Number one is mental health. About 40% of the women we work with, mental health. Slightly over that in the statistics that come out of the multi-agency risk assessment conference, 44%. So, it's mental health is a key player in this, and living long-term with abuse, particularly with coercive control, really undermines women's mental well-being and can exacerbate mental health and can lead to trauma and PTSD. We also run our training and events, and we had over 500 people attend that. We run counseling, both a support group and one-to-one counseling, and across that we had over 100 women use that. And women who identified as having other than domestic violence, so this includes sexual violence, stalking, forced marriage, honor-based violence. We had over 100 cases that fell into that group as well. So that's just giving you a picture of what a domestic violence service looks like, what we're dealing with. So I'm going to hand over now to Davina, and she's going to, kind of give you some context about how we identify and, what we're working with. So Davina, thank you.
So good evening, everyone. So I'm going to first go over what is normal in relationships, and this is probably classed over not just in romantic relationships, but probably through friendships, through family relationships, through work relationships. You have disagreements all the time. You might have different goals, different career aspects, different ideas about children's welfare, how to raise the children, how to discipline the children, for example, teasing, laughing, showing affection, and obviously having attraction towards each other. So this is things we see as normal, healthy relationships. So I'm going to show you something called the equality wheel of equality. So as you can see in the middle of the core of it is equality. On the outside, there's non-violence, and then the little segments in the middle are factors that contribute to having a healthy relationship and showing equality to one another. So as you can see, it's non-threatening behavior, showing respect to one another, having that mutual respect, trust and supporting one another. You know, if someone's saying something, you trust and support them, even if, for example, they have different career goals or different interests, you support them through that. Honesty and accountability. So we're not seeing any blame pushed over. They can account for their actions. If they've made a mistake, they will be honest and admit that mistake. Responsible parenting. So sharing responsibility, being a positive role model for the children, communicating appropriately, shared responsibility as well, not just in terms of the children, but maybe within the household, maybe working, making family decisions together rather than having a dominant person in the household. And economic partnerships, making decisions about money together. That doesn't automatically mean you have to open a joint bank account, but it's all about honesty and transparency and making those decisions together and how these arrangements are going to be made through the partnership. And finally, negotiation and fairness. So it's accepting change. You know, we're humans at the end of the day. We all change with age and with our experiences and circumstances. And being willing to compromise as well. If you are in a relationship, it is about compromising. It's not the same as being single, where you're just having to look after yourself as well. So what is a situation that can escalate? So this is where arguments or disagreements don't get resolved. So it can create an underlying tension, a bitterness, resentment, teasing that is constant all the time and undermines one another. So, you know, it might be okay to tease something about it once, but when it's constant and belittling, it does have an effect on the other person. It will take away that person's confidence, and they might start to self-isolate and things like that. Differences in child raising that may seem unsafe. It's normal to have different opinions about raising a child, but when it's putting the child at risk, I think it can escalate as well to then putting further risk to the mother or whoever's involved. They might be at risk of forced marriage, for example, female genital mutilation. We see that as well, and we work with that. Financial restrictions and lack of sharing. So, for example, if they have a joint universal credit account, but it all goes into one person's account and the other person can't access it, or they have a set allowance and they're not allowed to steer away for it from whatever reason, and they have to work with that allowance and show what they're spending, for example. It's a way of controlling behavior. Personal restrictions on movement, restrictions on contact with family and friends. So we see it a lot where they might have a tracker on their phone where they might be calling them multiple times an hour to see where they are, when they're going to be home, who are you with, send me pictures of who you're with, let me talk to who you're with. You know, stopping that contact with family and friends, or maybe putting them in a light where the family and friends might be seen as bad, or that they're evil, or that they're not good for you, to further isolate this person. So they have a lack of support network. And sex without consent. So sexual abuse, rape, and assaults. It doesn't always have to be disclosed, and we can still support with it, and a lot of the other services can as well nationally. And it's a way that things can escalate, because if it's not picked up on, or if it's not stopped, the control and coercive behaviour and the abuse can continue and escalate and become worse. So I'm going to show you the power and control wheel, which is how we can further identify abusive relationships. So at the core of it is all about power and control. So it's about the abuser having the power and control over their victim. So they would do this by using intimidation. You know, they might be throwing things, shouting, being aggressive, using emotional abuse. So putting her down, making her feel bad about herself, isolating her as well further, calling her names, calling her crazy. So it includes gaslighting as well, making her feel guilty. So we do see a lot of victim blaming within the work that we do. You know, I made him angry, I made him do this, and that's not the case at all. Using isolation, as I mentioned, you know, isolating them from their networks, from family and friends who might pick up on this behavior and show concern. So that's a lack of support network that they have, and they might feel like they won't be able to leave because they've got nowhere else to go. Minimizing, denying and blaming. So this is where the abuser saying, oh, it's not that big of a deal, you know, you're making a mountain out of a molehill, denying that any abusive behavior even took place, or blaming the victim that it's their fault that they lashed out, or they hit them, or they're controlling them. It's all their fault because, you know, you do this or you do that. Where it's the reality is they're just trying everything they can to keep that power and control over that person. Using the children, so we do see this a lot as well, especially in our one-stop shops, where the children are used to get information about their partner. You know, are they seeing someone new? Where's she going? What's mummy doing? As well, using visitations to stalk and harass her, threatening to take the children away, which makes more incentive for her to stay as well, making her feel guilty about the children. You know, a lot of the time they are good dads and they are good, you know, but this is what we hear from clients, you know, they are good dads, they've never harmed the children, they've done this, but it's the case of this is what the children are witnessing. If they're witnessing the abusive behavior, they are classed as victims as well themselves. Using male privilege, treating her like a servant, making all the big decisions in the household and the family, acting like the master of the castle, being the one to define men and women's role in the household or in society. You know, you have to stay home, you can't work, you can't do this, you have to wear this, you can't see this person, you can't have male friends. It's not often that we see, you know, just with how patriarchy is in society, this is kind of how they use male privilege as well. And using economic abuse, preventing her from getting a job, making her ask for money, not giving her access to accounts or cards. So we have seen it as well where people are told they don't have bank accounts, they can't have one, they don't have access to one, and this is all they've been told, so they believe it. And then we support empowering them to say, you have got rights, you can open a bank account, you have got rights to your own money. Taking her money as well, we see it a lot where the universal credit isn't even given to the person whose account it is, it's just sent straight to the abuser's account, and not letting her know about any income or family income or having access to it at all. And then finally, we've got coercion and threats, threatening to leave her, threatening to commit suicide. So that's a high risk indicator for us on that assessment that Stacey mentioned earlier. If they threaten to commit suicide if she leaves her, it's a high risk indicator because there's a direct link to threatening suicide and the risk of homicide as well. Making her drop her charges, using intimidation and threats. He might be threatening the family, he might be threatening the children, making her do illegal things, making her carry out threats to other people, to do something to hurt her as well. So at the core of it is all about power and control, and these are the ways that an abuser uses power and control to manipulate and to control someone else. And then on the outside, we've got physical and sexual violence, because it doesn't always have to be taking place for it to be classed as an abusive relationship, but it does automatically make it a high risk situation if those have taken place as well. So the definition of domestic abuse, so the cross-government definition, is any incident or pattern of incidents of controlling, coercive, threatening behaviour, violence or abuse between those 16 or over who are or have been intimate or family members, regardless of gender or sexuality. So it can include, but isn't limited to, psychological abuse, physical, sexual, financial, which is now classed as economic abuse, and emotional. So these types of abuse we just saw as well in the power and control wheel. We saw some examples as well through that. So coercive control has been made a criminal offence from 2015. So you can call the police if you believe, if you feel like you are being coercively controlled in a relationship, to support to have that person be removed. Even if you're here on a spousal visa, you still have rights. They can still remove him, and you can still then take the time to get access to the services that you need, whether it be solicitors, immigration, safety planning, refuges, benefit advice, for example. So coercive behaviour is classed as a pattern or acts of assaults, threats, humiliation and intimidation or other abuse that is used to harm, punish or frighten their victim. Coercive controlling behaviour is a range of acts designed to make a person subordinate or dependent by isolating them from sources of support, exploiting their resources and capacities for personal gain, depriving them of the means needed for independence, resistance and escape, and regulating their everyday behaviour. So we saw this as well in the power and control wheel. Lots of examples of controlling behaviour, because that's what it is in the core. That's what abuse is. It's about power and control. It carries up to a maximum of 5 years imprisonment, a fine, or both. It applies to intimate partners, former partners, and family members. So a lot of the time we can get solicitors involved as well if there's been a recent incident or arrest, where they can get a non-molestation order, which is a longer term, usually around a year, where the abuser wouldn't be able to contact her indirectly or directly, or turn up at the address. And if they breach that, they're in breach of the law, so they have rights to be arrested by the police. So some example of...
I'm going to take this one from here.
Sorry, I'll hand over to Stacey now.
Thank you. Right, I'm just going to give some examples that we've experienced. Limited access to family and friends is really common, and it's usually the first thing you see. And often jealousy is brought in. The partner feels, oh, I just want you to spend time with me. So it starts at a, kind of being justified, but after time it's not. we had a woman who her older son was turned against her, and both the father and the older son would lock her in the house when they went out. She did manage to come to our women only basic English classes, and after several years of attending the classes was finally ready to leave, and we were able to help her do that. But yeah, you know, that's pretty intense isolation and control. A lot of women are intimidated. We do see women who are in relationships with a range of partners, from, you know, respected professionals to, you know, people who are criminals. Often if the partner's in criminal activity, he will do whatever he can to involve her in that, and then use that as a way to threaten her with the police, threaten her around access to her children. And the children, using the children is a really common issue. This goes on, I'm sure, on both sides, you know, women threatening the man that he's not going to see her children, men saying they're going to take the children away from her. But we've seen men actually take the children out of the country if they have dual citizenship or they are citizens of another country. And it's really difficult for the woman to get the children back. So one of the things we do help women with is to get an order where the children can't be taken out of the country. Controlling money and food. We had a case where a woman, the fridge was locked. We've had a woman who was working full-time, but her husband took all her money. Actually, we've had quite a few women in that situation. So, you know, this use of power and control is quite extensive, and certainly victim blaming, telling her she's crazy, overplaying, you know, kind of her reaction to it, using it as a way to take her power away. Next slide, please. So I've seen some things come up about gender, and yes, you know, anyone can be a victim. Men and women can be a victim of domestic violence and abuse. But in terms of risk, the high risk cases are mainly women. So, you know, the crime survey of England and Wales estimates that 1.7 million women and just under 700,000 men were victims of domestic violence and abuse to the year ending 2022. So that's 29% of the victims were men. However, when you look at the high risk cases that come to the multi-agency risk assessment conference, and these aren't all victims of physical violence, they can also be victims of threats and coercion. There's often sexual abuse involved too. 91% of the victims that come to our local Greenwich Merrick were women. And the men that came often were victims, the perpetrators were men as well. So they were in gay relationships, but what we see most commonly are older adults, older parents being abused by their adult children. We're seeing more and more of those cases coming to Merrick, usually where the children have alcohol and substance misuse and mental health issues. I will say that, you know, we do see some, you know, perpetrators who are women, and we have had a lesbian case that was a high risk case that's come up several times. And we have had, you know, a woman being the perpetrator and a male being the victim. Usually, not always, but usually in these cases that we see, substance misuse, mainly alcohol, are a key player. And rather than coercive control, what you've got are people living very chaotic lives that sometimes get violent. But then when they sober up, they make up again. And so they are cases that often come up time and again as repeats. They need a lot of agencies working together to really make a change. So I don't want to underplay that men men, of course, can be victims, and we always signpost men, and we actually support men by phone if they're older parents, you know, because both parents are victims of an adult child, and these adults are not 20, they're 40. It's really interesting, and it's increasing. But, you know, generally women are much more at risk of serious harm from domestic abuse, and it's very much part of this wider culture that tolerates male dominance, and you know, that's a reality of our society. So I think you know, it's important to keep that in mind. Next slide, please. Children are now considered victims of domestic abuse if they live in a house where there's abuse. And as you can see, 90% of children who live where there's domestic abuse are in the same or the next room when the abuse occurs. So it has a huge impact on children. And, you know, it's really important not to lose sight of that. And unfortunately, perpetrators will play on this. So can we have the next slide, please, Davina?
Oh.
I think you got to click it a few times. Yeah. So there's ways they can be directly exposed to domestic abuse, indirect abuse, so by witnessing it, but there's also direct abuse. And studies show, you can click the next button. Is it not? There it is. Oh. So, you know, they can often intervene and be hit, but they can also often be being abused either through coercive control or through direct injuries. And, you know, there's quite a high percentage of children who are being physically abused, where the mother's being physically abused. Next slide, please. So why do men abuse? Well, they want power and control. They may be in a situation where they don't feel they have power in their life outside. They may be in a low-paid job with no prospects or unemployed, and they want control over something, and they feel it's their right, and that feeds into these patriarchal views that men must have control about something. The behavior could be normalized. They could have grown up around that kind of behavior. They might believe women aren't equal to men. You know, their interpretation of religion and culture could do this. So, you know, no religions say it's okay to abuse your partner, but forced marriage as opposed to arranged marriage does go on, where the woman and the man can be forced into a relationship by their parents. Honor-based violence is where the family feel the activities, almost always of a girl or a young woman, are breaching their honor, and so use that to justify abusive behavior towards the girl, and also really restricting her movement and her lifestyle. You know, learned behavior from family, growing up with that, could be a response to, you know, a childhood trauma, but ultimately they're making some kind of choice there. So I think, you know, that needs to be recognized. Next slide, please. And why do women stay? Well, the number one reason women stay is because it's the safest option, because women are at their highest risk when they leave the abuser. So, you know, we really work at our level to listen to the women and ensure, you know, she is absolutely safe when she's ready to leave. Often women have lived with this relationship for a while, and they accept it, and they think this is what a relationship is. Some have no expectations of being in a loving relationship because all they've known is an abusive one, and that may be from history with family as well. Victims have to take the action to leave. They have to be proactive, and often they're not in a mental place to do that. They've been so undermined, they have no confidence to do that. They also could be under huge family pressure or cultural religious pressure not to leave and break up the family. There's a lot of shame associated with divorce and relationship breakdown. They could fear their immigration status will leave them destitute, or they'll have to return to the country they came from. We can actually do some help on that, but you know, they may not be aware of that. They may not be ready to make this big change. They may be very desensitized to the abuse, and because they've been gaslit, they may feel it is their fault. And ultimately, they may still be in love with the partner, even though he's abusive. Next slide. And this is back to you, Davina. Thanks.
So we see a lot of immigration issues, especially if they've come here on a spousal visa, as mentioned before, but they might not leave because they might have been told for years and years that, you know, if you leave me, you're going to be sent back and your children will be here and you have no options but to stay with me. And but they do have options. There's something we call a DDVC, a destitute domestic violence concession. So this is where someone who's married in a civil partnership, unmarried or same-sex partner to a British citizen, if they have a relationship breakdown due to abuse, we can apply for this DDVC so they can have access to benefits, so they have time to sort their immigration out, so they can sort housing out if needed to, and with access to benefits as well, then comes access to refuge spaces, because paying for it privately is very expensive. Also, the change of conditions for no resource, change of circumstances, risk of destitute. So in the council as well, there are teams for no recourse to public funds teams that can support people who don't have recourse, even if they're not married and their immigration is insecure, they still have access to support services and options. It's just about sharing information with them after they've been told, you know, you don't have rights, you're going to be sent back home. There's a lot of fear that is at play there, and it's probably the biggest factor that stopped people coming forward and accessing support and not sharing information, because they're scared about what's going to happen. Are you going to inform Home Office? Are you going to do that? So yeah, fear is a big factor as well. But there are immigration services that do work with legal aid, so they have a lesser rate, or they don't have to pay, or they can set up a payment scheme so they don't have to pay in bulk fees, and things like that. There are solutions out there. So identifying victims and how to ask. So ask open-ended questions, things like, you know, just open, are you okay? You know, is there anything I can do to help? Roll with the resistance. You know, if she says she's okay and she doesn't want help, you might want to ask again a few times. Just say, you know, I can see you're upset. Is everything okay? Expressing empathy. Obviously, we're not trying to make them feel even smaller than they have already been made to feel. Validating their feelings, if they have disclosed, validating that, you know, I believe you, there's support out there for you, let's contact the local authority. Be honest and open about your concerns, about what you might have seen, about what they might have said to you. Respect the person's choice and validate them. So, you know, if they do want to stay in that relationship, but they want support, there are services out there as well within the council and social services that can support with creating healthier relationships and educating, rather than the solution of leaving and getting legal protection orders. And but sometimes there's no other choice, because you can't force someone to change. Ask them about telling their GP. We're getting more and more referrals from GP services now from the training that we do over Greenwich, and there's a lot more access because a lot of the time the GP is the only professional body that they're usually allowed to see sometimes. So they can also be signposted to counselling services and therapy services that would help them manage their feelings and might give them the confidence back to then be able to take some actions and some steps to leave. If you are concerned and you do hear abuse that is concerning, or if there's threatening behaviours or any threats to kill or seriously harm or injure, you can call 999. We get a lot of referrals where the call has come from neighbours and the public and the police, and we all have a responsibility as well to safeguard. So some empowerment tools would include motivational interviewing techniques, which we'll go on to talk about as well. Putting the survivor in control. So, you know, asking them, what do you want? What is your choice? What do you want? Rather than saying, I think you should do this, I think you should do that. It's about giving them the autonomy back, giving them the control of their life back, even if it's with a simple question of saying, what do you want to do now? You know, there are options out there for you. Peer support groups, as we've mentioned before, isolation is a big factor. When they come to us, they often don't have support network. Their relationships with family might have broken down due to the abusive relationships, and through support groups they can network again, they can build social skills again, and start to make friends. Long-term counselling as needed to kind of work through their experiences, make sense of it, and understand that it's not their fault. Practical options such as housing, volunteering, and getting back into work. So for example, at the Her Centre we have our outreach coordinator who supports with getting people placements and back into works and apprenticeships. And of course, we need more sanctions against abusers. We often hear, you know, why do I have to move if they're the one committing the crime? And why do I have to take out protection if they're the one committing the crime? And they're completely right. But it's just unfortunate that these are the steps that they have to take for the abuser to stop, for them to stop having access to that person, because it can escalate so quickly. So I'm going to hand back over to Stacey for some motivational interviewing.
I think what I'm going to do is just put this slide up. So if Davina, if you can put this up, we've covered this to a certain extent, and we've only got one other slide, which is our video, and we're going to send the slides out, and I really want to allow time for questions.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd like to thank everyone for your time and interest, and open it up to questions now, if that's all right, Cheryl.
Yes, of course. Thank you. So I lost my voice then, which is great because I've got 2 hours of training in the moment. So there was a lot of people in the chat were talking about the issues around not being believed, and the support that they get from police, or not support from police, as some of the cases have indicated. And what would your advice be?
Well, we do. There are specialist teams that do deal with domestic violence within each police force. So, you know, unlike the general police who have, you know, ranges of awareness and training, the specialist police will be quite proactive. They do know about not putting the victim at risk. They are also very linked into other domestic violence support services, so they'll always make a referral. They'll refer to the multi-agency risk assessment conference, at which case it's heard by a range of professionals who can bring in support to the victim of that abuse. So I would always say, ask, you know, who can I speak to who specializes in domestic violence? And in that way, you would get somebody who's much more experienced and trained.
I would also say if you do feel like the police haven't done their duty, or you feel injustice in some sort of way, you can always make a complaint.
Thank you. And there was another question which was quite was where they asked around the male, is there any support or training, etc., to support men who admit to exhibiting coercive control? You know, is there something to help that perpetrator not be that in the future?
Yes, there's an organization, national organization called Respect. They provide support to perpetrators. You know, they work very closely with other domestic violence services. So, you know, we have confidence in them. The prison service used to run anger management, but anger management wasn't the right way to do this, because if you're using power and control, if you're coercive control, then it's not about anger. It's something else. So Respect is a very good organization. For male victims, there's Mankind, though Respect also gives support to male victims. So there are a few national organizations out there. There's much less support for men than women where they're victims. And it's partly because, you know, the majority of victims that are identified are women, and the highest risk victims are mainly women.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you. There is many questions and we won't get through them all. However, I just want to share the screen with regards to if everybody can scan for the survey, it would be fantastic if people can report back what their thoughts are on today's session. And while that's up, we'll continue asking the questions, if that's okay, Stacey and Davina.
Yeah.
Amy, was there any particular question that you've noticed in the chat that you wanted to bring up?
Yeah, there were some really interesting ones. Bear with me. Sorry. There was one interesting one around can a perpetrator commit coercive control unintentionally, for example, if they are neurodiverse and can't understand what they're doing?
I would say yes. You know, they don't even have to be neurodiverse. They could be thinking what they're doing is just what one does in a relationship because they don't have the right experiences. And if they are challenged on that and are open to, you know, learning and finding a better way to be in a relationship, then that's really positive. And often there are services where there's, you know, friction and, you know, maybe some elements of control, but it's not escalated to a point where it's quite frightening, where social services or a voluntary sector agency will provide that joint work with the family to try and change those patterns and make it a more healthy relationship for both parties and for their children.
Great, thank you. One of the questions that I thought was interesting, I'm so sorry. Are there trained, which I think I know the answer to this, are there trained coercive control officers in every area?
Of the police, is that
Yes, it was, yeah, the constabulary and the police in general.
I think there's specific officers that deal with abuse and sexual abuse generally, so they would be the officers that would be the trained ones that are trained in coercive control as well, but they all should be trained because it's illegal.
Thank you for that, Davina. I think also, I don't know, pardon me, I don't know if sometimes the first officer that somebody sees may be the response officer. or their neighbourhood police officer, and so they're not trained in as much depth as those specialised officers. Is there anything that you feel that can be done or should be done, or a good example of, if you know of any area that has a really good example of supporting those officers that are on the front line to help support victims of domestic abuse and coercive and controlling behaviour?
Well, in Greenwich, they do provide training not just for the specialist team, but for frontline police. The difficulty is getting enough of them to be able to access it with shift work and with all the other demands on the police. So our community safety team have run a number of detailed training sessions for police officers, and reaching as widely as possible. I think there is more focus now. Sarah Everard's murder by a current police officer really made the police realize just how much work they needed to do. And I think that has brought proactive change across the police service, and there is better training and more more action being taken to work with organizations like ourselves. They're not naturally comfortable working with the voluntary sector, but they're getting much, much better. And I would say, we had one case, a young woman came in, and the frontline police officer who worked with her was so sympathetic and was just brilliant. And he said, yeah, I grew up in a family with abuse, and I totally understand what she's going through. So, I think a lot of the police do have their own positive experiences, or, their own learning to bring to it too. But yeah, there's a need to keep rolling out that training to as wide as possible across the police services.
Lovely, thank you. We're coming up to the end of the session, and any of the questions that haven't been answered, what we'll do is we'll send them over to Stacey and Davina to answer them, and we'll put them in a document that we'll send to you so that you can see the responses. I think I'd like to thank both Stacey and Davina for your time this evening. And the important thing is that we keep raising that awareness, that if we take anything away from all of the sessions this week, that we share the knowledge that we've learned this week, that we share the information with others so that it can help others. And so that also what Stacey was saying, that although their respective charity is in a London borough, it's in each borough and each region, there are other charities, local charities, that are referred to from the NCDV, which is the National Centre for Domestic Violence, etc. They're referred to at a local level. It's local charities such as the Her Centre that are the ones that are working with the victims, that are working with those people that are affected by domestic abuse and violence. And without charities such as the Her Centre in our local areas, we'd be a very dark place indeed. And I think it's really, really reflective that we say thank you for charities like this that work on the ground with those people. And it's so thank you very, very much for your time this evening. So just so that everybody knows, that you will be receiving an email over the next couple of days with all of the links, all of the presentations, apart from yesterday's presentation, but there is links for that one for this week. And I hope that you've enjoyed our series on Not on Our Doorstep Hidden Crimes webinar series this week. So thank you very much for all of your time, for everybody, and we appreciate it. If you can scan the QR code and let us know what you think about your experiences this week with our webinars, really helps us to plan for the future. So thank you so much. And then that's the end of our webinar this evening. So thank you so much. And thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.